Well, how are we doing, Community Church? It is absolutely amazing to be with you today. Ever since Lou gave me the invitation to say, hey, this summer, would you come out and spend a weekend with us? I've been so excited about having a little bit of time with all of you, interacting, getting connected relationally even a little bit. So this is an absolute privilege for me to be here. Like Lou mentioned, I've served Suncrest Christian Church. We're in Chicagoland, and we just have this vision for helping as many new churches as possible get started as we can. And I want you to know that your church is essentially a group of heroes to us. We celebrate new churches. Think about this. This church started out of nothing. And just a short time later, it's already this. And of course, it isn't just this, sitting in a room and worshiping God, as important as this is. It's your impact in the community around you. It's your invitation to people who maybe have given up on church or have a incorrect, honestly, view of God, and you can kind of help them see who God actually is. So we tell your stories at our church all the time. When you have baptisms in a few weeks, Lou's going to post some pictures of those, I'm sure. We're going to share those pictures with our church, and it's just one of the most satisfying things in the world to me to help our church celebrate what our new churches are doing all over the country. So I'm absolutely thrilled about that. I'm grateful for your impact. And of course, I'm grateful for Lou. I mean, you guys know Lou, right? This guy has it, right? Now, here's my thing. I interact with leaders all the time, and there are a lot of capable leaders out there. Lou is at the top of that list. But a lot of times when you get a capable leader, you also get an arrogant leader, and then you're like, why did it have to work out that way, right? But when you get a capable leader with a humble leader, and you get the sense that, man, this guy's going to do whatever God leads him to do, but he's going to do it boldly, he's going to do it strong. That's what I love about Lou. So it's a complete honor to be here today. I want you to kind of have a little picture of our church, just 2 minutes here before I dive into this, because, when Suncrest started a little over 25 years ago, we were just a little brand new church. And we were a church that other churches were, sharing their leadership resources with us, their financial resources with us, all those sorts of things. And we made a very important decision while we were still getting the help from some outside sources to say, once we're up on our own feet and able to do this on our own, we will not forget that people invested in us. Of course, the people who invested in us didn't need us to pay it back to them. They needed us to pay it forward and helping start other new churches. And so that's what we've been doing. And so over our history, we've started now over 50 new churches. The best part of this is that these 50 churches have gone on to start more new churches. So there's over 500 new churches in our stream. And it's just kind of a conviction of mine to say, I want to spend my life helping as many people connect with God as can be. And we can probably reach thousands where we are, but we can reach tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands if we multiply new churches. So we just made that decision early on to say, we will multiply new churches. And these days, because we're really generous to these churches, you can probably imagine, churches that are getting ready to get started, they tend to line up at our door like, hey, would you help us? Would you help us? Would you help us? So we get way more requests than we could ever fulfill. And, maybe we can fulfill 1 out of every 10. But when I made my first visit to Long Island and kind of walked around this community and heard Lou's vision, I absolutely had the sense this is one we should invest in. And my goodness, through COVID, through everything else, it's amazing to see what you've done. So, thrilled to be here. I am going to conclude your Storyteller series today. And of course, you've been looking at Jesus as someone who, isn't this wild? He had a way of kind of making points in people's lives, not having to stand on top of them and preach down at them, but his storytelling kind of had a way of coming around the side. And you've probably experienced that in your life where someone, if they come straight at you, you get real defensive. But with a story, you're like, oh yeah, that's a different way to see it. And Jesus' stories, they are always, always insightful. They are often surprising. But the one we're going to look at today is just purely wild. When you read this story, maybe you've read it before, you're going to step back from this and think, did Jesus really say that? What in the world is Jesus getting at here? In fact, I have a group of guys at our church who I'm trying to invest in myself, kind of share some of my spiritual leadership with them. I'm trying to help them learn to read the Bible on their own, so I'm working with them. And one of the guys, he started doing it. He's reading the Bible on his own. And a few weeks ago, he read this story. And he was like 2 minutes after he read it, he just calls me. He's like, Greg, what is up with what Jesus said in this story. And then I got to have a great conversation with these guys about it. So I'm very excited to share this story with you. But since it's got a little wild element to it, I'm going to give you some context here on the front end. I want you to think about a couple of questions with me, and then we'll dive into the story together. So 2 questions. Are you currently happy with your various resources? And I'm going to give you 4 categories of resources here in just a moment that you can think about. And second, what would you trade those resources for? So when you think about resources, you could think about this as capital, like capital that you have in your life. You could think of it as influence. You could think of it as wealth, but it won't just be financial. There's 4 categories. But let's start with the obvious one, right? Financial capital. Are you currently happy with your financial capital? Your salary, your investments, maybe your debt, maybe your retirement, whatever financial capital you have, you could almost put it on a scale of 1 to 10 and say, how happy am I? And I think one of the big questions about each kind of capital that I'm going to talk about today goes something like this. If I need it, if I need to use it, do I have it? Am I in a position where I could take advantage of an opportunity if I had it? So just think about yourself. We're not going to share information here. Financial capital, how do you feel about that? But as you can imagine, there's a lot more resources or capital in life than just finances. Think about this. We all have physical capital, right? And by physical capital, I mostly mean your body, your mind, your health, your mental health, your physical strength. And you'll start to see how these capitals start to fit together, that some people use their physical strength, their physical capital, in order to gain financial capital. And sometimes we actually work it the opposite way. We use our financial capital to gain health again. And I'm just curious, from a physical standpoint, your time, your mind, your body, do you feel like you have what you need? Scale of 1 to 10, you feel like if I need it, it's there for me. I can maximize it. A third kind of capital, this is a big deal, is our relational capital. And you can just start to think about the health of your relationships with your friends and your family. And I don't know this situation with your friends and family. Like, is your relational capital healthy? Is it rich? You might even say this, I have rich relationships. Or is it strained? Or is it estranged? You know, a little secret about life from Jesus is when your relationships are good, life is good. And when your relationships aren't good, life isn't good. It actually doesn't matter how much money you have, what your job is, whether you feel successful in other areas of life. This is a secret here. So one of my questions about your relational capital is, do you feel like, hey, I have friends that I could count on. If I need it, if I need this relational capital, I could use it. Think about your relationships. And then the last one here is spiritual capital. Now, we're in church, of course, so of course the pastor has to put in spiritual capital. And I don't want this to be spooky to you. This is not that complicated. This is just your faith. It's your character. It's your integrity. You could probably measure it maybe by how much peace you have in your life at any given time, or how much influence you have on other people's faith. And I'm really curious. Do you feel like you have spiritual capital? Like you have enough of God's work inside of you, his activity inside of you, a confidence from him, that if you needed to use it, you could? You know, why is it that a group of guys would listen to me, try to encourage them to learn how to read the Bible, and then go read it themselves? It's because I have some spiritual capital in their life. And I just want you to think about your financial capital, your physical capital, your relational capital, your spiritual capital, as we walk in to this story that Jesus tells. Because he's going to want you to think about all of these things and how they fit together and how you might trade them. So, here's the wild story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 16. It says, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Now, I want you to see this just real quick. It says, Jesus told his disciples. So the disciples, maybe like you, I don't know if you would think of yourself as a disciple of Jesus. Maybe you wouldn't yet. These are people who had kind of committed themselves to following Jesus, and I think this is mostly what Christianity is, shaping their life so that it looks like his. Shaping their life so that it looks like his. Now, he's speaking to his disciples, but we're actually going to learn a little later in the story that there were crowds that were around, and even within that crowd, there was a group of Pharisees. And actually, this is an important thing to think about when we listen to Jesus tell this story. He's talking to people who say, I want to shape my life to look like yours. But there's crowds that are interested in what Jesus has to say. They're listening, but they haven't actually made that commitment yet to say, I want to follow for Jesus to be my leader. And then there's Pharisees who are like the religious leaders who think they have religion all figured out, and Jesus is constantly reminding them that they don't. So there's this rich guy, and he's really, really rich. And he has this manager, and the manager kind of goes off course here and is accused of wasting the rich guy's possessions. Story goes on. It says, so he called him in, and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. Now, this is one of the things Jesus does all the time in storytelling. He almost always has an owner and a manager. And one of the ideas behind that is that you and I are the managers. We kind of think of ourselves in this world as owners, maybe. But the truth is we're just managing whatever God's creation is, whatever God has given us. So we can start to see ourselves in this story. In this case, the manager had been unethical, and he's going to get called on the carpet for it. The story goes on. It says, the manager said to himself, what should I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. And I want to show you something in this verse just for a moment. This manager had been squandering, had been wasting the owner's possessions. And he's about to lose his job, and so he starts to think, how can I secure my future? Because I'm not going to have this job anymore. And he says, I got some problems here because he says, my master is taking away my job. Not only is my master taking away my job, he's probably going to tell all his buddies that I don't have any integrity, I don't have any spiritual capital, I don't have any character, so I'm not going to be able to go on my reputation and get another job. He says, I'm not strong enough to dig. He said, maybe when I was a young man, I could have traded some of my physical capital for financial support. But I'm not in that situation anymore. I don't have enough physical strength to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I mean, listen to what he's saying here. He's saying, I could beg. I could, but relationally, with my relational capital, that would put me way down here. I'd be ashamed. I would lose all of my relational capital if I start begging. And so this manager, starting to look at life through these different lenses of these different capitals or resources that we have. He goes on. He says, I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. You can see the wheels turning a little bit. He's like, got to secure my future somehow. I got an idea. Here's the idea. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. So he's managing the accounts for his masters. These guys owe him money. We're going to find out big money. And here's his plan. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. So I don't know if any of you have 900 gallons of olive oil at home. If you did, you would be a very wealthy person, at least in this day, because 900 gallons of olive oil was 3 years' wages, right? Let's just say 50 grand a year. This is a $150,000 bill that this guy owes to the master. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Hey, just cut your bill in half. Goes on. Then he asked the second one, how much do you owe? And then we get the same kind of scenario here. 1,000 bushels of wheat. It's a lot of wheat, he replied. And he told him, take your bill and make it 800. Now, it is a little interesting to me that there's two different debtors. One gets a 50% discount and one only gets a 20% discount, which does kind of remind me, the manager is, he's going to be called shrewd here in just a moment. And shrewd isn't a negative word, it's a positive word. It's he knows people. He's like, yeah, if this guy's going to take care of me later, I probably have to cut his bill by 50%. This guy will take care of me later if I just cut by 20%. I know people, all right? And he's doing something that's obviously dishonest, but he's setting himself up for the future. He thinks, man, if this guy who owes 150 grand, I take his bill down to 75,000, he'll probably let me move in with him next week. That's the way this works. And interestingly, when the master finds out how this guy is pulling all this off, this is the surprising line. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. Does that seem weird to you? I mean, the master just lost 75 grand on one deal, whatever the wheat was worth on another deal. But have you ever been this way? Like maybe some of you are in business, maybe you even see it this way. You're like, man, you know what? I lost that deal, but I got some respect for the guy who beat me. He pulled it off. He acted quickly. He got there before I could. Man, I look back, I probably should have fired him first and not given him the chance. Like there should have been some non-compete or something. I don't know what was going on. But this guy's like, I mean, I'm losing money, but I respect this guy who acted shrewdly. Now, this is one of the questions in this parable, if you're into kind of interpreting these things precisely in what Jesus said. So in this verse, it says, the master commended the dishonest manager. And some people look at this and they say, oh, that master, we're still talking about the story, the master and the manager, because we're just about to turn here where Jesus is going to apply it to us. And in these stories, Jesus is the master and we're the managers. So is it Jesus commending this, or is it the guy in the story commending us? It's kind of hard to say. But these next two lines, definitely Jesus. Follow this. Jesus says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. And Jesus is saying that's something we all should learn. Now, I want to break this down for you just a little bit because I can imagine all of you are on different places in your own spiritual journey. And one of the ways Jesus talks about the world that we're in, it would be true today as much as it was true 2,000 years ago when he was talking, is he says there's the people of this world. And then he says, then there's the people of the light. And when he says the people of this world, he's talking about a couple of things. I want you to see this. He's not condemning this world. He is talking about this world as a broken place, though. A place that saddens Jesus, that makes him look and say, this isn't the way the world was supposed to be. Actually, maybe you remember Jesus said this. He said, in this world, you will have trouble. It's a promise. But take heart. I have overcome the world. That's what Jesus says. Maybe you remember when Jesus said this about the world. He said, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into this world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. So Jesus is saying there's kind of a darkness, a brokenness to the world around us. And we're all familiar with this. I mean, if we're honest, there's a little darkness, brokenness inside each of us. So we can't just say it's that big bad world out there. But just in the way the world works, man, it's driven by these capitals, especially financial capital. And it sometimes becomes a very dark place. But the other thing Jesus means whenever he says this world is he reminds us that the people who live, maybe you, I'm certainly tempted to do this, we sometimes get so narrow focused that we think this temporary world is all there is. But even though it's temporary, that we place value on the material parts of this world, we pour our resources and capital into experiences that are gone as soon as we have them. And Jesus is drawing a distinction here. He's saying the people of this world, like it's a broken place and people only see the temporary part of it. But if you are a person of light, disciples, if you were a person of light, you'd be able to see something more broadly. You'd be able to see with light of the world that there's more to it than that. That there's a world after this world. That there's a chance for redemption in the midst of the brokenness. And that maybe we shouldn't all have a race to the bottom, but instead we should be enlightening the world. Now the truth is, Jesus had not had a lot of success with his followers when he tries to help them see this bigger perspective. What was the conversation Jesus had with Nicodemus? He said, hey, you must be born again. And Nicodemus, probably like us, would be like, Jesus, how? Born again? Like back into my mother's womb? And then born again? And Jesus is like, no. It's bigger than that. It's broader than that. If you were a person of light, you'd be able to see what other people can't see. And then, just to make sure we're not missing it, Jesus says this, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. This is Jesus. This is the line my buddy called me about. He's like, really, Greg? This is what Jesus wants us to do? Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And I want to just draw your attention to two words here. The first is use. So Jesus is taking this, and he says, hey, take this financial capital, this worldly wealth. He's like, it's neither good nor bad. It's just capital. And he says, well, you know what a smart person, a person of the light, a person who can see the big picture, you know what they would do? They would use these capitals in order to get something that's more important, just like the shrewd manager did. And then I think this is actually a really important word. He doesn't say use worldly wealth to buy friends for yourselves. I mean, none of you are so lame, right, as to walk out down the street and be like, hey, here's $50, would you be my friend? Like, nobody would do that. You don't buy friends. But if you're a person of light, you're able to step back and see how the whole world works and be like, oh, I actually could trade some financial capital. Create an environment that would lead me to some friends, to people I could have a rich relationship with. Now, I got to tell you this. I've been at my church for 25 years, and when I first came, one of my roles was the youth pastor. And I'll never forget this. One of the first families I met that had teenagers as a youth pastor was the Johnson family. Dawn and Rex Johnson, they had kids that were in my youth ministry. And Rex, he's a business owner, pretty well-off guy. He loved to golf, and he found out that I liked to golf. But of course, I was 22 years old, and I couldn't afford to golf. But he could afford to take me golfing. And he did. And I said yes. Oh, I played more golf than I've ever played, all paid for by Rex Johnson. And while we were on the golf course, we became friends. And he spoke into my life as a young man trying to become a man, soon to become a father. And I spoke into his life from a spiritual aspect and talked to him about his kids who were in my youth ministry. And as you might imagine, as a pastor, I was trying to treat everyone fairly, but if Rex's kids could use some special investment, I was raising my hand to go invest in them. And I just want to say, well, what's happening there? Was Rex bribing me to take care of his kids? No. That'd be like, hey, here's $50, can I be your friend? But what Rex was absolutely doing is he was using some of his financial capital to build relational capital with me. And it turned into spiritual capital with his kids, who were then baptized and became followers of Jesus. And Jesus would say, that's the way the world really works. So I think what Jesus is doing here is that he has a vision for the world that rejects naivete. And I want anyone here who would think, I'm a follower of Jesus, I want you to reject naivete and say, oh, this could really, really be a different way, a new way, a bigger way, a godly way to look at the world. And I don't know about you, maybe you have friends like I do who aren't followers of Jesus. And this is what I find a lot of times with them is a lot of times followers of Jesus look at people who aren't followers of Jesus and they think followers of Jesus are just naive. They're like, oh, that'd be an easy person to take advantage of, or they don't even see how the world works. And I'm like, Jesus is saying, don't allow that to be. The people of the light, the people who are my disciples, you ought to know how the world works better than anyone else and act shrewdly toward it. And a lot of this is just gaining perspective. So I happen to have my son with me, made the trip out to New York with me. He's 17 years old now, but when he was 5 or 6 years old, I was coaching his basketball team. I don't know if any of you ever coached your basketball team. We had a practice one night. We were coming home from practice. It was kind of late, and we were stopped. I noticed in my cup holder in my car on my way back from practice that I had a coupon. This is back when McDonald's did Monopoly. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, so I had this coupon for like a free McFlurry, I think it was called, in my car, and it expired that day. I'm like, you know what? It's kind of late, but tonight, Jackson and I, we're getting ice cream on the way home. So we go to McDonald's, we have some ice cream, we have a good talk, whatever, it's late. It's probably past his bedtime at this stage. We're walking out of McDonald's, and I'm going to tell you about the conversation I had with Jackson. I'm not proud of this conversation. I'm not saying this is good parenting. I'm just giving you an honest picture. Maybe you've done this too. I said, hey, Jackson, this is a lot of fun getting ice cream tonight, wasn't it? Yeah, it was great, Dad. Hey, just so you know, Mom doesn't need to know that we stopped at McDonald's and got ice cream, right? She doesn't need to know. And your sister, Abby, she definitely doesn't need to know that we stopped and got ice cream at McDonald's. Got it? He got it. I could tell. Like, all right, we're in good shape. We're getting in the car. I'm backing out of the parking spot at McDonald's, and I hear from Jackson in the back seat. He says, hey, Dad, you ever do things with Abby and not tell me about it? I'm like, yes, I do, son. Yes, I do. This is the idea. Like, it's a bigger perspective, right? Like, he put it together. He's like, oh, I can see it. That's not a naive view. And I think this is what Jesus is asking us to do. I think this is what Jesus is asking us to do. He's like, can you see it in this story? There's a lot more going on in the world than just honest and dishonest. In fact, I think this is part of the story, is that our naivety means that there is so much more to being a follower of Jesus than just morality. There's so much more than that. Now, there is morality. It matters. But I don't know about you. A lot of times, people I run into, they think Christianity and morality are the same thing. Because somewhere along the way, probably a follower of Jesus was all about what was right and wrong and just presented that's what Christianity is about. Now, I don't want you to miss this. Jesus says the morality piece is important. This is actually what he says. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Morality does matter. Character does matter. It's actually part of building spiritual capital in your life. But it's so much more than that. I think the other thing, the second thing that Jesus does when he's kind of saying reject this naivety is he says, you should accurately see and rank what really matters. This is a shift going beyond what's just right and wrong that morality would teach you, and this gets into wise and foolish. And I just want you to think through those four capitals with me just for a moment, and I want you to rank them. Like, which one's most important, which one's least important? Financial capital. Your financial resources, your income, your debts, your assets. Physical capital. Your health, your well-being, your mental health, your physical health, your mind, your body, your strength. Relational capital, the richness of relationships that you have, or the strained or estranged relationships that you have. And your spiritual capital, your character, your integrity, your faith, the things that would bring you peace in Christ himself. Now, if you were to rank those four capitals, from most important to least important, it would help you to see, what trades should I be making? See, ironically, one of the things that makes it a broken world that we live in is that many people think financial capital is the goal. That whoever dies with the most toys wins. But one of the things that Jesus would teach us is he'd say, actually, financial capital, it has value, but I would actually trade that for some health. I would trade that for some relationships. I would trade that for some spiritual capital. Those would be good moves to make. This is how Jesus says it. He says, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Riches that are more than just financial riches. And he's starting to help us see, isn't he? That there's a ranking to these capitals. I want you to think about your own life. Which capitals do you have to trade right now? You have enough of it, you could trade it, and you could trade it for something else. I don't want you to miss this. When Jesus talks about money and life, spiritual. Like, he talks in these terms all the time. It was Jesus who said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? He's like, that's a bad trade. When he talks about the parable of the talents, he says, go and put that money to work. And the two guys that went and put it to work, used their financial capital. It really, really mattered. He met a rich young ruler, and he said to the rich young ruler, hey, you want to follow me? No problem. Just cash in your financial capital, and you'll have spiritual capital. And the rich young ruler said, not going to do that. And he walked away. Jesus is helping us see how the world really is and the trades you should make. So, last thing. Jesus says, aggressively exchange lesser resources to attain the greater ones. This could happen in your life in all kinds of ways. I'm just going to share some very quick examples from my life, okay? A number of years ago, life was getting really busy for Jenny and I. And someone suggested to me that we pay someone to clean our house. And when someone first suggested that to me, I thought, that's like I grew up in a home where you would never pay somebody to clean your house. It's almost like a moral value. And I'm like, I would never do that. And then someone said to me, well, you're busy, church is busy, whatever. Would you like to have more time with your kids instead of cleaning your house all the time? Why don't you just trade some money for time with your kids? That's a totally different way to think about it. A number of years ago, Jenny and I were considering becoming foster parents. We ended up becoming foster parents. We have 4 kids right now. 2 are biological. One's foster that we adopted. One's foster that's not adopted yet. But I remember looking at the foster situation and thinking, that's going to be kind of expensive. It's going to cost me money out of my pocket. And someone asked me, actually, my wife asked me, Greg, wouldn't it be worth a little bit of money to have the chance to change a kid's life? And at least for our son who's 21, serving in the Marines right now, he came into our home. He found a family. He actually was baptized and became a follower of Jesus. And all to think I was about to say no to it because it was going to cost money. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at the church that I grew up in long ago. And it brought all these memories back to me because when I went back to speak at the church that I grew up in, here's the story I got to tell. I said, hey, do you remember this? When I started at Suncrest, it was a new church. I had to get financial support from the outside. My new church, my home church, I said, hey, would you support me financially? And what was I doing? I was using some of my relational capital with that church to ask them for some financial capital, but not financial capital for me, for the kingdom, so that I could start at Suncrest. And they invested $10,000 in helping me get started at Suncrest. And when I went back to them a few months ago and was celebrating all that God has done, I said, hey, I just want you to know that $10,000 investment in Suncrest, over the last 4 years, we've given $1 million to help new churches get started, to help serve our community. I just think that's a good investment. You should take that every time. And I just want you to see this, that in my life, but maybe more important in your life, if you're a person of light, if you could see how the world really works, Jesus wants you to think, I have these different resources. How would I maximize them, leverage them, exchange them so that I can gain something that's worth more? The last line of the story, Jesus says, the Pharisees, you cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and they were sneering at Jesus. And if you love money, you would hear all this and sneer at Jesus. But I'm inviting you, I think Jesus is inviting you into a life today to think, how by tomorrow, by Monday, and how over the next 5 years, could you take the resources you have and trade up? And I pray for that right now. God, I thank you for the great privilege of being here today and being a part of this wonderful church. God, I hear the stories of lives that are changing, of people stepping into faith. And I'm grateful for the investment that we've made here that's paying off in ways that can't be measured in dollars and cents. And God, I pray that for each of us in our own lives, we will be people who are people of light, who see the world, who have perspective, and make the right trades to build your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.